Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of the Thrown Togetherness video log. Today we're talking a little bit about writing again, this time on SPEW drafts. Now those of you who are not from New Zealand or Australia might not be familiar with the colloquial term SPEW, S-P-E-W. It means to vomit. And SPEW drafts are a method for getting words on paper or words on the screen when you are trying to draft something that's a bit overwhelming, that's big, that you don't have a lot of time for, or you're not quite sure what's going on. So the start point of this blog post, and the one that I'm basing this on, was me working with a group of PhD students on how to get their dissertation or thesis written. And we're working through Alison Miller's book, which is called Finish Your Dissertation Once and for All, How to Overcome Psychological Barriers, Get Results, and Move On with Your Life. And I've since run this course 5 times with different groups of students. And I can't recommend that book highly enough. It is so good at identifying what it is that's stopping you from moving on with your thesis, with your writing. And I just learned a lot about management skills generally, really helpful. One of the chapters in that book is on strategies for writing and revising. And the key element of Miller's strategy is to give up on perfectionism. As writers, whether we're academic writers or other kinds of writers, we really enjoy reading smooth, well-written prose, particularly people who are just beginning their writing journey. You know, we're not aware that writing that we often read has gone through significant editing processes. And I talked in the previous vlog about writing being an iterative process. So Miller in her book, and many other PhD coaches, recommend developing writing as a practice where you commit to regular bouts of writing, just to keep getting things down and just keep it going. And one book that you might find in your university library has the attractive title, Writing Your PhD in 15 Minutes a Day, which advocates keeping a journal to just keep your writing going for at least 15 minutes a day. I don't think you actually can get through the PhD on just 15 minutes a day. Sorry for that. But as you begin writing in a no pressure burst of only 15 minutes per day about anything, you can gradually swing your subject around to your PhD or your piece of difficult writing, about what you plan to write that day, how you're feeling about it, what the problems are, reflections on your reading. And the point is really to let go of the high stress, perfectionist writing bouts that have the potential to freeze you in a kind of writing panic, and replace those with low stress, random writing bouts that promote creativity and get you moving. So I fully endorse those strategies, particularly if you're a perfectionist. But as a supervisor, sorry to my students here, but nobody else needs to read that. No one wants to read that. As Miller says, write the first draft with the door closed. That is no ghostly supervisors over your shoulder, but it is for you alone to see. The next step is to take that ramble, to take that free writing or that SPEW draft and start thinking about how to crack the door open a bit. That is, to start preparing it for viewing by others. So in my process of getting writing out the door, I found Inga Mewburn's Prezi really helpful. Inga Mewburn is the thesis whisperer. You can find her blog. And she has a Prezi available for free online called Write That Journal Article in 7 Days. So her writing process is also really supportive of low pressure writing bursts. And she is where I got the term SPEW draft. She's an Australian, so great to have the Aussies there with our SPEW language. But these SPEW drafts are not the same as the 15 minutes a day of just writing whatever. They're incorporated into a structured method for writing. So her method, which I'll outline now, I would say that the caveat is that it's not, in my experience, actually 7 days to a journal article. It's a bit like the 7 days in the biblical creation story. Some people claim there was actual days, but many more people see them as sort of unspecific time periods or stages that may encompass millions of years. So the kind of before you start for Inga is data collection. So you've got some stuff already. You've done some field work, you've done your reading, you've got a bunch of things that you're interested in writing about. So day one after that is commit to the project, check the publisher's guidelines, pick a journal, decide on the type of paper, speak to co-authors. In the case of your thesis, it's quite a long day, probably writing a proposal. Day two is writing a tiny text. And for me, this is really the really important stage in my writing process, like an abstract. So this guides the point of your paper and inserts it into the debates that you're interested in contributing to. So I like to use Joseph Williams' cookie cutter approach here. Joseph Williams wrote the book Style, 10 Lessons in Clarity and Grace. And he has a kind of approach to writing an introduction that I use for this tiny text. So beginning with a shared context that your reader might share, a problem that needs to be addressed in that shared context, and then connecting that in with a so what. Why should we care about that problem? What's the consequence of not researching this, for example? And then a kind of sentence at the end of that tiny text that says something like, this paper will, or this chapter will, or this thesis will, with the solution to that problem that you have identified. So that's day two. So day three is working on a SPEW draft, and that's what this vlog is about today. Newbern recommends getting all the little bits of text that you have, such as those journal snippets from your 15 minutes a day, and any other text from talks that you've given, and chuck them all together into a file. She uses Scrivener as a project, but you can use Microsoft Word or whatever it is that you generally use. And then you just kind of blurt out what you're trying to do in whatever form it comes to you. When you can't think of the right word, you just stick in any word that will do, or you'll put in square brackets and say, find another word here. If you need a reference, you just write insert reference here, or just put whatever you can remember from the reference, and you just keep moving. And you keep moving until you've got nothing left to write about this piece, until it's reached some kind of natural conclusion. You've got to the end of your argument. Or you realize that you need more data, or you need to do more reading in order to develop it further. So that's day three. Day four, you take that SPEW draft and you do a scratch outline. So what I usually do here is I print out the entire SPEW draft, because I'm old school and prefer reading like that, and print out the tiny text. And then I read it all together, and then I try to come up with some kind of logical structure that usually isn't the structure of the SPEW draft. The SPEW draft structure is often me working out what I'm trying to say. And often I find that the thing I get to at the end of the SPEW draft often needs to be at the beginning of a revised structure. I actually keep that SPEW draft next to me printed out, and then I start rewriting the chapter or rewriting the article again, and I don't copy and paste. So I'm retyping what is in there. And some people think that's a bit crazy, because why retype something that you've already got? I think for me, what that process helps me do is to only transfer the things over that are really quite good. And if I have to retype it, I'm not tempted to just select a little bit more and just copy it over because I might need it. So it kind of tightens the text and brings it together in a way that wouldn't if I just cut and paste it. But everyone has a different process here. And at that scratch outline stage, that might be where I bring in my co-authors if I'm lead author on something, and I want my co-authors to help me with that that outline. So that's day four. Day five, we start cleaning the mess. So for me, this means rewriting the whole thing from beginning to end. And as I said, actually retyping using the printouts and handwritten structure as the guide. Inserting the references properly. And this is probably the longest day in the cycle for me. This is when I'm really working out with the door open what this is going to look like for an academic audience. Day six, Newbern calls it murder your darlings, or edit. So she is taking it from Stephen King's process, where he calls editing murdering your darlings. And this is where she gets it from. And that means cutting out all those little side notes and interesting facts and the references that you just dropped in there to show that you're smart and really anything that's not part of the story or the argument that you're trying to get across. And she quotes Stephen King to say, murder them, even when it breaks your little heart. So it might be that really nice sentence that you wrote that shows that you have a full and deep understanding of Latour, and you want to have it in there, but it's actually not relevant to your text. So that's the end of day six. Day 7 is letting it rest. So again, like that Old Testament story of the 7 days of creation, it ends with a day of rest. Rest the article and come back to it refreshed, or pass it to a colleague to read. I would say don't submit without letting it rest, even if it's just one day and you're one day late. Let it rest and come back to it the next day, and a bunch of things will come out to you that you wouldn't have noticed when you've just finished. So moving back to thinking about SPEW drafts, and particularly in light of the thesis, if you're using this method to write thesis chapters, at what point should this go to your supervisor? And I think it does depend on the supervisor, so it's worth having that discussion with your own supervisor. When I was a PhD student, I tended to submit mine about the end of day 5, which is once I have done that rewrite, I've cleaned the mess. But I would say, so there's still a lot of editing required, but it's readable, it has references, it's proper English. I've checked it for grammar errors. It's connected in with the literature. It's a structure that makes sense. So it still needs a lot of editing, but it's not going to freak out your supervisor that you don't know how to write. In general, I would say don't ever submit your SPEW draft to your supervisor, especially if you don't know them very well. And the exception to this rule is if you've never submitted anything, or you haven't submitted anything for a long time, and your supervisor wants to kick you out of the university because they can't see the evidence that you're writing, then absolutely feel free to submit them your SPEW draft. They do need to see it. And in that case, my recommendation would be to print the whole thing out on double-spaced 12-point font and just kind of let them hold the comforting stack of papers in their hands and have a look at it, but don't let them take it, because if they start reading that SPEW draft and they want to edit it, it's not going to go well, I don't think. But talk through your ideas and see if they can help you turn that SPEW draft into a scratch outline. But for me, a better scenario would be for you to give the scratch outline a go yourself and start plugging your material into that outline, even if it's just as bullet points. Then you can show them the SPEW draft and the scratch outline so that they know you're not a crazy person who can't write, but you're working through your creative process. You can show them my blog post or something from Ingham Newborn if you want to explain that. But other supervisors have the 30-90 rule, and I've tried to implement this a bit with my students. And what the 30-90 rule is that the supervisors want to see things when they're in the 30% done stage and in the 90% done stage. So the benefit of giving your supervisor something in the 30% stage is that they can advise on the direction of your work before you've gone too far. And I'd say this is especially important for science students where you're doing experiments and stuff like that. So for me, this would mean giving them a tiny text and a scratch outline rather than a full SPEW draft necessarily. And then the 90% stage is when you're, coming up to feeling like you've gone as far as you can go yourself, and you're actually needing the help of your supervisor to push you up to 100%. What's it going to look like to finish this piece of writing? So I hope I haven't scared you too much by saying don't give them your SPEW draft. Some supervisors complain that their students won't show them anything at all because they're so perfectionist and they want their supervisors to wait until it's totally done and it's perfect. I really don't advocate that kind of perfectionism, and you know yourself best if that is you. It's possible you need to give them your writing rather than leaving it to the end. But what I am trying to advocate is that you give yourself time to be messy and creative, to get more down on paper and have something to work with. So certainly you need to involve your supervisor in that bit of creative mess. As I said, at the end of day 5 can be a good time for them to step in and let you know which darlings have to go and which things need more evidence. So finally, I'm reminded of a really helpful way of thinking about this process that my good friend Anne Hill first introduced me to. And I think I've remembered it wrong, but I find my remembering it wrong useful for myself. So in this process, there's 4 jobs in creative work like writing. And the first is the madwoman, the second is the architect, and the third is the engineer, and the fourth is the cleaner. So when you are writing, you first let the madwoman out who dreams big and crazy, and she's the one writing the SPEW draft, okay? When you're done with the SPEW draft, you kick her out of that space and you invite the architect in to help with the scratch outline. So this architect takes the crazy ideas and puts them into some kind of beautiful structure and design. Once you've got that, you ship out the architect. You don't want to do too much structural change after that, and you bring in the engineer. So the engineer takes the architect's plans and tries to build the structure paragraph by paragraph so that it holds up the overall design. Finally, when the engineer is all done, and not before, you let the cleaner in. So she's going through the dots, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, checking your references, changing your grammar, deciding on what needs to be capitalized, applying the journal or the thesis format style, and so on. And you don't need to do that until right at the end. So successful writers, I think, control which person is in the building at any one time. It would not be a good strategy to let the madwoman in at the end to wreck everything and imagine a whole new piece. And I have worked with people who do this. And it would not be a good strategy to get stuck with the architect endlessly designing and redesigning the structure. And I have also met people who do this. But we also can't have the engineer running the project from the beginning without some kind of overall dream and structure with which to work with. And we cannot have the cleaner coming in at any other stage, getting in the way, sweeping up sawdust while there's still a lot of work to be done. So the lesson is embrace your crazy, imperfect writing and use it in a well-structured creative process that gets publications or thesis chapters out the door. Thank you very much. And check out the post on this on my blog, www.throwntogetherness.com.